At 10:03 a.m., just 3 days after a leaked report smeared Jasmine Crockett with a $75,000 payoff, Joy Behar brandished the evidence live before 8 million viewers and branded her a traitor. The stage was set for execution, but Jasmine's calm wasn't fear, it was a trigger. And when she pulled it, the script didn't just flip, it exploded. What truth was so devastating it left her accuser shattered on her own stage? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. It didn't begin with an explosion, but with a whisper hidden in the static of a restless night. At exactly 2:17 a.m., an email slid quietly into the inbox of a senior producer at The View. The subject line screamed in all caps, "For immediate review, confidential Crockett intel." Attached was an 18-page PDF branded with a blood-red stamp, "Confidential." The sender called themselves only one thing: J. Kelmer, whistleblower. The producer clicked it open. What she saw jolted her upright claims that Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had secretly taken a $75,000 donation from Datamind, a data analytics firm once under federal investigation for racially profiling users with AI. Even worse, the file alleged Crockett had met behind closed doors with Datamind's executives just months before the company launched a predictive policing test in minority neighborhoods. Within minutes, the report was marked urgent, forwarded up the chain, and escalated. By 7 a.m., it was already on Joy Behar's desk, still warm from the printer. The trap wasn't built in broad daylight. It was crafted in silence where no one could see it coming. By 10 a.m. that Monday, the attack went live. Joy Behar, seated at the View's roundtable, held the report aloft like a final judgment in court. Her fingers gripped it just tightly enough to tremble on cue. Leaning toward the camera, her voice cut sharp with venom. "A woman who claims to fight for justice, yet allegedly takes money from a company that exploited the Black community for profit? If this is true, Jasmine Crockett isn't just a hypocrite. She's a traitor to her people." Gasps erupted from the audience. No context, no verification, no call to Crockett for comment. Just a live-on-air execution. The co-hosts nodded gravely, fueling the fire. The accusation hung heavy in the room like a sentence already delivered: no trial, no evidence. By noon, the online inferno had erupted. Crockett's name spread like wildfire across social platforms, amplified by bot networks, pundits, and echo chambers frothing with rage. News outlets churned out blood-bait headlines as if circling prey. Crockett caught in data scandal. New racism scandal stains Civil Rights Committee. No one checked, no one questioned. What mattered was that it sounded believable because it fit the narrative they craved. Within hours, Jasmine Crockett's reputation was dragged across 1,000 timelines. People she had marched with, fought with, bled with were now posting doubts, wondering if they had chosen the wrong woman. Truth hadn't just been wounded, it was buried alive under the weight of fabricated proof. And the cruelest part? She hadn't even been given a chance to speak. While headlines screamed betrayal and pundits sharpened their outrage, something quieter, calculated, was unfolding behind locked doors. On Capitol Hill, where loyalty is traded like currency, Jasmine Crockett found herself standing alone. The silence from her own party wasn't an accident, it was strategy. By Tuesday morning, she could feel it everywhere. Allies hesitating before saying her name on TV panels. Staffers suddenly out sick. Endorsements vanishing one by one from social media. A senator who once hailed her as a rising force for justice sent word through an aide. Maybe she should take a tactical leave from the Civil Rights Committee to protect its integrity. Another veteran strategist called her directly, speaking in coded caution. "Cool the room down, Jasmine. Let the storm pass." But Jasmine knew storms never just pass. They either swallow you or you outlast them, and running was never in her design. To the public, it looked like nothing. No tweets, no fiery press conference, no viral rebuttal. Commentators painted it as fear. "She's cornered," they said. If she had nothing to hide, she'd be screaming her innocence. But what no one saw, what no one could see, was the war room beneath her office. She had turned her glass-walled conference room into a bunker. The table, once meant for policy briefings, was now buried under server logs, metadata charts, and reports marked with neon tabs flagging irregularities. She didn't call in PR flacks or spin doctors. She assembled a strike team, 4 people, chosen carefully, bound to secrecy. At the head sat Marisol Drake, a digital forensics expert from Boston who once cracked a global ransomware ring. Opposite her, Ellis Trent, a House ethics investigator known for toppling corporate lobbyists in 2021. Next, Damian Holt, a lawyer on AI ethics and federal data misuse, fresh off a high-profile FTC testimony. And then the shadow in the hoodie and cap, eyes hidden, voice calm. He never gave a real name. Jasmine called him only the Node, a former data mine systems architect. He'd walked away when their algorithms were twisted into what he called civilian targeting. No one had heard from him since until Jasmine pulled him in through encrypted channels. Jasmine didn't sit. She stood, one hand gripping the table, the other a yellow legal pad covered in her own sharp handwriting. No teleprompters, no aids, no wasted words. She let the silence weigh heavy, forcing the room to feel the stakes. Then, with measured force, she spoke. This wasn't politics. It was engineered. That report wasn't leaked. It was a launch built to detonate when I had no chance to respond. She flipped her notes to show a diagram. Server times, scrub domains, metadata trails. The whistleblower email didn't line up with the file's origin. The PDF used a scrubber only contractors carry. Legal jargon inside was wrong planted to look official to outsiders, but easy to spot as fake. She circled a date in red and locked eyes with each of them. This isn't about me. This is a prototype, a template. They picked me because they thought I'd panic, lash out, issue denials. But I don't play defense. I build cases. Damien leaned forward. So, legal countersuit? Federal complaint? Jasmine shook her head slowly. Then came the line that froze the room. I won't fight from the shadows. I'm going straight into the arena they built to bury me. I'll take every receipt and I'll do it live. On The View, where they fired first. The room fell into stillness. Marisol's pen froze. Ellis exhaled sharply. The man in the hoodie didn't even blink, just nodded. Jasmine scanned the table, her voice cutting like steel. I don't want spin. I want the source. I want the digital trail. I want the fingerprints. In 72 hours, I'll go on national television, not to react, to reconstruct. This wasn't damage control, it was a counterstrike. Jasmine Crockett wasn't hiding. She was loading the one weapon more lethal than outrage, undeniable truth. While Jasmine was quietly building a team of truth hunters, the producers at The View weren't waiting for her defense. They were already scripting her downfall. Inside ABC's broadcast compound on West 66th Street, the mood wasn't anxious. It was cold, precise. In a soundproof editing bay lined with glowing monitors, 2 senior producers froze a frame of video from 2022. The clip came from coverage of the International AI Governance Summit in San Jose. On screen, Jasmine Crockett in a Navy suit, reaching to shake hands with a man wearing a lanyard, Vernon Hale, Datamine's CEO. The moment lasted less than 14 seconds. No sound, no context, just one of those throwaway interactions that happen at every conference. But to the producers, it was a weapon. That's the link, one muttered, tagging the clip. They cut it down to 12.3 seconds, then added a digital zoom as Jasmine smiled politely, slowing the frame just enough to make it look familiar. Too familiar. Perfect. The graphics crew had their overlays ready. Jagged yellow and red text colors meant to trigger alarm. Across the bottom, Jasmine X Datamind? A question, but not really. Questions in graphics aren't questions, they're judgments. In the corner, undisclosed ties, blinking under an animated data web, subtly tying Jasmine to a digital conspiracy. They tested sound beds, finally choosing a low-pulsing drone, ominous, but not too obvious. It made viewers lean in, feel uneasy, without knowing why. The producers called it emotional priming. In politics, it's called trial by montage. Upstairs in a glass-walled planning room, the lead segment writer mapped out the interview not to explore, but to corner. The questions were stacked like dominoes. Step 1, proximity. Why were you at a private cocktail event with a company under federal investigation? Step 2, insinuation. Did any money exchange, hands donations, fees, anything? Step 3, mockery. So we're supposed to believe it was just coincidence you were photographed with the CEO? Step 4, pressure. Would you hand over all communications with data mine under oath? Step 5, discredit. Some in your own party say your silence says it all. What are you hiding? Step 6, final blow. How can voters trust a leader whose ties to tech raise more questions than answers? The structure was surgical, each question tightening the noose. The goal wasn't to hear Jasmine's side. It was to break her live, under lights. No one in the building asked about fairness. Ethics weren't on the checklist. No one wondered if Jasmine had been shown the footage in advance, or if the report's origin was even verified. It didn't matter. Public perception would seal it. A junior staffer dared whisper editorial responsibility. A single glare shut her down. This wasn't journalism. It was theater. And the ending had already been storyboarded. The final file sat on the server. Crockett segment, Sharn hard hit master. One producer leaned back and summed up the plan. If she comes, we end her live. If she doesn't, we call it silence. So while Jasmine Crockett was piecing together metadata trails, sworn statements, and digital proof, The View was constructing a stage play. A 22-minute hit piece built not on facts, but on optics and pressure points. They didn't need her to confess. They just needed her to falter. What they didn't plan for, what they couldn't foresee, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't coming to dodge their trap. She was coming to expose its architects, on their own stage, in real time. While producers polished their ambush with doctored clips and loaded questions, Jasmine Crockett wasn't preparing a defense, she was preparing detonation. Not of herself, of the entire machine that tried to script her destruction. The binder rested flat on the mahogany desk, like a silent weapon plain on the outside, lethal within. Its matte black cover carried no title, no emblem, no initials, just emptiness. Jasmine had ordered it that way. No clue, no signal, until she opened it under the eyes of millions. Inside were 54 pages, each one built on evidence, not emotion. The first section, printed on a heavy cream cardstock and tagged with a red marker, was called Signature Deconstruction. Jasmine had brought in not one, but two handwriting experts, one from the National Archives, another a private investigator famous for exposing corporate fraud. Their conclusion was devastating. The signature on the so-called data mine agreement wasn't written by hand. It was pieced together from public records, then machine-generated to mimic Jasmine's writing style down to every curve and angle. One expert had scrawled in the margin, "This wasn't forged by a person, it was forged by a system designed to imitate trust." Jasmine drew a red line under that sentence, twice. Next came the section clipped behind it labeled Metadata Spine. It was a full forensic breakdown of the document aired on TV. The findings were clear. The file hadn't come from any government source. It was created overseas early morning on pirated editing software. The timestamps, the encoding, the file's skeleton, everything screamed forgery. Built for distribution, not for official use. Hidden deep in the data were traces showing it had been prepared for broadcast segment markers, placeholder cues, production formatting. Jasmine printed it all, highlighting each inconsistency in bright yellow. She didn't plan to argue it. She planned to show it raw, line by line, for the audience that had only been given smoke and shadows. But the binder's most dangerous piece wasn't ink or paper, it was sound. Locked in the middle was a sealed drive holding an audio recording of a closed-door meeting at Datamine's PR firm. On it, a senior executive calmly explained their playbook. "It doesn't need to be true, it just needs to spread. If she speaks too quickly, we call her defensive. If she waits, we call her guilty. Either way, we win the first word." Jasmine had listened to it over and over, not with anger, but with sharpened clarity. The truth struck her. This was never about facts. It was about timing, narrative, and control. And their plan relied on one rule: Jasmine Crockett would never speak first. The final section, tucked in the very back, was the most explosive of all, marked only by a tab of dark gray. It was the map. Jasmine's team had followed every dollar, tying data mine to the media outlets that carried the attack. It started with faceless contributions into a Delaware political fund. That fund pumped cash into a lobbying group called Citadel Insight, famous for shaping stories while staying in the shadows. From there, the money fractured into consulting contracts and media retainers, some landing in investment firms that quietly financed the parent company behind the very network airing The View. Jasmine didn't speculate. She documented. Payment slips, federal filings, tax records, all laid out, organized, unshakable. On the last page, one sentence stood alone, bold, centered, underlined. The truth isn't hidden, it's being sold. This binder wasn't a request. It wasn't even a defense. It was judgment. It didn't shout. It didn't beg. It waited. And when Jasmine Crockett stepped onto that stage, she wouldn't plead for fairness or time. She would turn each page calmly, deliberately under their lights, until the same audience that had been primed to condemn her began asking a different question. Who forged this, and why were you so eager to believe it? And so, with the world watching and the cameras set to capture her downfall, Jasmine Crockett stepped into the studio not as a guest, but as a woman ready to erase a line drawn against her and redraw it with truth. At exactly 10:03 a.m., the red light above camera one flared on, marking the start of what producers hoped would be Jasmine's live collapse. The set looked polished, almost sterile, but beneath the glow of soft blues and whites, the tension vibrated like static before a storm. Joy Behar wasted no breath. Her tone was sharp, rehearsed the voice of a seasoned host confident she controlled the room. Congresswoman Crockett, she said, angling toward the audience, if you truly had no connection to data mine, then why was its CEO listed among the VIPs at your private fundraiser in August 2022? It wasn't curiosity. It was an accusation dressed as a question association, framed as guilt. Before Jasmine could speak, the massive LED screen behind the panel lit up. A photo appeared carefully chosen, carefully altered. Jasmine mid-laugh, champagne glass in hand, standing near Vernon Hale of Datamine. They weren't touching, not even side by side. But the image had been cropped tight. Shadows deepened, colors cooled to twist casual into intimate. The audience didn't erupt, but a low wave of murmurs moved across the room, like the ground shifting before a quake. A head shake here, a sharp inhale there, just enough for the camera to swing wide and capture doubt. Joy leaned forward as if she'd landed her strike. This isn't coincidence, she pressed, voice deliberate, each word like a gavel. This is the question, who do we believe? The trap was sprung, the challenge hung in the air, cloaked as morality, sharpened to condemn. Jasmine didn't flinch. She looked at the screen, let the photo hang, let the silence expand. Then, calm and unhurried, she turned back to Joy. She straightened her cuffs. She lifted her posture, composed, controlled. Her hand slid to the leather case by her chair. A soft click. She opened it without a glance up, without haste. Out came the black binder, the weapon of truth built page by page from forensic reports, digital trails, sworn evidence. The studio lights caught its edges as she set it down hard on the table. The thump cracked through the room, cutting off the whispers like a blade. Only then did Jasmine meet Joy's eyes. Not with rage, not with theatrics, with clarity so sharp it unsettled. You asked who we should believe, she said, her voice steady, unwavering. I came here to answer that, not with clever words, not with spin, with evidence. Her palm pressed firmly against the binder. And I suggest we start here. For the first time, Joy blinked. The audience leaned forward. The camera didn't bother flashing back to the doctored photo. It didn't have to. The balance of power had shifted. The stage had been built for an execution. But seated in that chair now wasn't a victim. It was a witness. A storm in navy blue, armed with proof no camera trick could erase. The binder lay open. The accusations still lingered in the air. But Jasmine Crockett didn't waver. She wasn't there to beg for her name back. She was there to expose what had been built in the shadows and who had allowed it to stand in the light. With every eye locked on her, Jasmine lifted the first document, edges sharp, header stamped with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. She held it high, steady, letting the audience see it before she spoke a single word. Then, clear and firm, she read aloud, "There is no investigation, no charges, and no record of any financial transaction between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Datamind Incorporated." The words cracked through the air like glass shattering. No wiggle room, no legal gray areas. Just blunt fact, stamped by the highest law office in the nation. She laid the paper flat on the table and looked up, not boastful, but calm, steady, certain. This wasn't performance. It was proof. And for the first time since the show began, the audience wasn't leaning in for spectacle. They leaned in for truth. She turned another page. Instantly, the LED screen lit up again, two signatures side by side. One was her authentic signature, pulled from a government file. The other came from the so-called leaked report Joy Behar had brandished just days earlier. At first glance, they seemed identical, but Jasmine began pointing out the flaws, the strokes too smooth, the angles too exact. No human hand moves like that. These weren't natural marks. They were machine-perfect curves. "This isn't handwriting," she said, voice cutting clean. "It's synthetic, a copy produced by artificial intelligence built from my public records." She paused, then delivered the knife. "They didn't just forge a signature. They weaponized public trust to manufacture a lie." Silence dropped again. This time it wasn't awkward, it was stunned. She didn't stop. Jasmine pulled the next sheet, this one covered in digital forensics, mapping exactly how and where the fake file had been created. She set it down with care, then said, "This report didn't come from any official channel. It didn't come from any whistleblower here. It was generated on an offshore server with pirated editing software, built to look like an authentic leak." Her finger landed on the final line of the page. "It was engineered to deceive. It was sent to spread. And it was handed directly to you, Joy." The camera caught Joy's face still, tight, no longer in control. Jasmine looked up, voice steady as stone. "So I'll ask again," she said, not softly now, but sharp, demanding, "if they could fake a member of Congress's signature and place it straight into your hands, what did you do to confirm it before airing it to the nation?" No answer came. The audience stayed frozen. The crew stayed silent. Even Joy sat in stillness, her power stripped. Because this moment wasn't about Jasmine anymore. It was about something bigger, how quickly truth could be bought, packaged, and believed. And Jasmine had just turned their stage light back on them. The room had already been struck by hard evidence, silenced by paper proof. But Jasmine knew there was still one piece missing, the most dangerous of all. The heartbeat of the lie, its voice, and she had brought it with her. She didn't shout. She didn't wave documents. She didn't need to. With calm precision, Jasmine Crockett slid a hand into the inside pocket of her blazer, her fingers brushing the cool edge of her phone. The overhead light stayed steady, glaring down like the eyes of a jury waiting for the next move. The audience sat in perfect stillness, so quiet that even the faint scrape of her nails against the leather table sounded like a warning. She unlocked the screen with a single swipe. No one breathed. Joy sat watching, perhaps expecting another sheet of paper, another carefully worded denial. But what Jasmine produced wasn't silence. It was sound. A single tap, then another. A soft click echoed through the studio speakers. And then, without warning, the voices began. A man's voice, calm, calculated, almost robotic. "Just tie Crockett to the story. No one checks. They'll see it, share it, believe it." A second voice, sharper, younger, female. "What about the metadata?" The man laughed lightly. "Doesn't matter. The media doesn't track origins. They track noise. The public will carry it, and if it blows back well, it's already out there." Jasmine didn't move. Behind her, the giant screen had gone pitch black, no graphics, no headlines forcing the words to fill the room like smoke. The voices continued. Another laugh, then a name dropped like a knife. "TW Strategies. We planted frames like this before. Cable networks eat it up. Add race, add hypocrisy. You've got a firestorm in 48 hours. The final line landed heavy, sharp, undeniable. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be loud. 2 full minutes, no soundtrack, no camera cuts, no escape. In the control booth, the director's hand hovered over the panic button. eyes darting to the countdown clock. But there was nowhere to cut. This was live. No delay, no disclaimer. Just raw truth, flooding into millions of homes with the force of a slow, crushing wave. Jasmine never spoke while it played. She never blinked. Her hands rested lightly on the binder, as if it anchored her in the storm. Her eyes stayed fixed not on Joy, not on the audience, but on the invisible space where spin collapsed into responsibility. Then the recording ended, and silence cracked open across the studio, heavy and suffocating, pressing down on every chest in the room. No applause, no gasps. Just stillness, the kind that makes the air feel thick, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Jasmine's hand moved at last, just slightly. She placed the phone face down on the table, not with force, not with drama, but with the calm finality of a gavel striking wood. Then she turned her head. Her eyes locked onto Joy Behar's, not with fury, but with weight. This wasn't an argument. It was judgment. And in that steady stare, there was a crushing calm, the kind of look that says, "You knew better, and you chose not to ask." Her voice was soft, but it cut like shattered glass. "You didn't invent this scheme, Joy." She paused, letting it sting. "But you carried it. You breathed life into it. You made it real." Her hand gestured lightly toward the phone before settling back on the table. "You gave it 8 million ears." Joy's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The sharp tongue, the quick comebacks gone. There was no script in the teleprompter to rescue her, no producer whispering a pivot in her earpiece. She was alone now, face to face with a truth she had delivered to the world, but could no longer redirect. Jasmine didn't blink. Her voice never rose, but it pressed heavier than a shout. "Do you know what makes this worse?" she asked. "They didn't even cover their tracks. They didn't hide the motive. They didn't need to." She leaned in, not with force, but with finality. Because they knew once it hit your inbox, it wouldn't be challenged, it would be broadcast. A woman in the front row shifted, uneasy. A man crossed his arms tighter. Another leaned forward, eyes narrowing not in disbelief, but in dawning recognition. Now Jasmine turned to the crowd, her voice calm, but colder. "This is what they rely on. Not violence, not chaos, not even hate." She let the pause sting. "They rely on comfort, on trusted faces, trusted platforms, never asking questions, on people believing the first version they hear, especially when it confirms what they already fear." Her words hung in the air like live wires. She looked back at Joy again, and this time grief crept into her tone. "You didn't forge the document. You didn't fake the signature. You didn't record that call." She stopped. "But you took their lie, and you gave it a stage. Lana." The pain wasn't performance. It was deeper. The pain of someone who had fought for her voice, only to watch her name twisted into a headline. The pain of watching a system built to inform turn into one that shreds truth and rewards outrage. Jasmine reached for her phone again, not to play another clip, but to slide it calmly back into her pocket, her hands steady, her breath even. And then she said the one line that shattered what little shield Joy had left. "You didn't speak truth to power, Joy. You handed power to a lie." The moment needed no music, no applause, not even reaction. Because this wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett or a forged file. It was about something rotting deeper, a sickness fed by silence, shortcuts, and the erosion of accountability behind every glowing camera in America. And Jasmine had just forced that sickness to stare at itself in the mirror. The room had just taken in the sharpest evidence of the morning. It still echoed in every mind like a single spark thrown into a field of dry grass. But what came next wasn't fury. It wasn't apology. It was colder justification. Joy Behar finally spoke. Her voice was a little too quick, too polished, like someone forcing calm while panic pressed beneath the surface. Her face stayed composed, but her hands gave her away, twisting the cue cards in front of her as if they could tether her to a script that no longer fit. "I only reported what was sent to us," she began. "It came to our producers from multiple sources. It wasn't my job to confirm every detail of a leak." She tried to sound professional, detached. "We're a talk show, not a courtroom." But even as she said it, her eyes dodged Jasmine's. They flicked to the cameras, to the crowd, to anywhere but the woman across from her. The excuse wasn't aimed at Jasmine. It was aimed at herself and at the viewers who still wanted to believe she was neutral. Jasmine didn't rush to reply. She let the space breathe, let Joy's words fall short. She could have struck back. She could have whipped the audience into another roar. But she didn't. Instead, she shifted in her seat, squared her shoulders, and leaned forward. Her voice when it came was calm, steady, not angry, but weighted with truth, too heavy to ignore. When you broadcast an unverified document, she said slowly, to your audience and to the entire country without context, without checking, without accountability, you're no longer just a reporter, Joy. Her eyes locked on Joy's, steady, unyielding. You become the final link in the chain of manipulation, the trusted face used to deliver a lie. Joy's lips parted, maybe to defend herself again, but Jasmine didn't stop. You're not the one who forged the signatures. You didn't alter the footage. You didn't stage the audio, Jasmine continued. But when you held that document up on live television, when you read from it as if it were truth, you gave it the only thing it needed to cause harm: credibility. She tapped once, lightly, on the glass table. Yours. The air grew heavier. The lighting hadn't shifted, but the room itself felt colder. Even the studio crew veterans of live TV, unshaken by drama, stood frozen behind the cameras. Arms folded. Breath held. They knew what they were watching wasn't spectacle. It was a turning point. Jasmine didn't falter. Her voice stayed low, but it carried the weight of someone who had walked through fire and kept hold of the truth. People trusted you, Joy. They trusted this show, this platform. You weren't just informing, you were shaping what millions believed. And when perception is built on lies, it doesn't just wound careers, it destroys lives. She paused, not for drama, but for the words to sink in like stone. You weren't reporting, she said. You were distributing. You were amplifying a weapon dressed up as information, and whether you meant to or not, that makes you part of the campaign. It wasn't insult. It wasn't rage. It was judgment. And then something no one could have predicted happened. Applause. It started with one person, tentative claps from the back row. Then another. Then another. Until the sound swelled into a wave, an ovation that shook the room. People rose to their feet, not clapping for a punchline, not for entertainment, but for truth delivered steady, without spin, without theatrics. For the first time in The View's history, applause broke out mid-segment. Not for a star, not for a performance, but for a woman who, in 5 quiet minutes with a binder and a phone, had dismantled an entire strategy built to destroy her. Jasmine didn't bask in it. She didn't smile or bow. Her expression stayed composed, her eyes steady. This wasn't triumph, it wasn't victory. It was something rarer, justice, however small. Her hands rested still on the table. The applause wasn't hers. It belonged to the truth she had carried in battered, but undeniable. Joy Behar sat frozen, staring down at the cue cards like they had betrayed her. The script she'd trusted was gone. The questions she had prepared were meaningless now. The producers stayed silent in her ear. No break came to save her. Only the sound of hands clapping, of chairs sliding as people stood, and at the center of it, Jasmine Crockett. Calm, steady. Grace in the middle of fire. And though she had never raised her voice, not once, she had already said everything. The confrontation had already rattled the room, but Jasmine hadn't come just to defend herself. She had come to reveal something bigger and far more dangerous than a smear. It was time to rip the curtain all the way down. She didn't call for graphics. She didn't need a screen. She simply unfolded a single sheet of paper, plain white, black ink, but heavy with consequence. The camera zoomed in on instinct, not by command, but because the moment demanded it. It was a map not of land, but of power. She set it flat on the glass table, tapped the center circle with her pen, and spoke with precision. Let's talk about data mine. From that name, lines spread outward like veins, sharp, calculated, damning. Jasmine's words landed one by one, steady as a gavel. Data mine, the company I was accused of working with, gets its funding from an investment group called Horizon Holdings. That's the starting point. Her finger traced to the next node. Horizon Holdings owns 12% of a lobbying and political intelligence firm called Citadel Insight. The name sent a ripple through the audience. Some recognized it from headlines, usually buried in footnotes. But Jasmine wasn't showing a footnote. She was showing a system. Her voice didn't rise, but the air itself felt heavier as she drew the last connection. For 10 years, Citadel Insight has poured millions into political campaigns, both openly and through PACs. But more importantly, she paused, the studio seeming to dim as her next words fell. Citadel holds quiet but strategic influence over three of America's biggest media networks. Her eyes locked on Joy. One of them is ABC. The effect was instant, not loud, but chilling. A collective intake of breath, a realization like ice down the spine. Jasmine wasn't attacking. She was diagnosing, and there was no cure on the table. Her pen tapped the paper again, light, deliberate. "This was never about me," she said. "I wasn't the end goal. I was the test case." Her gaze swept across the audience, then beyond the walls to the millions watching at home. They wanted to see if a single timed lie backed by the right connections could live on air long enough to become reality. She let the silence carry it. The stillness wasn't doubt, it was recognition. People in the audience weren't clapping now. They were remembering. Headlines, narratives, stories they had once swallowed whole. Jasmine drew a steady breath, not for herself, but for focus. "And if this worked," she said, "they could do it again, to someone else, about something else, until we're no longer citizens, just spectators, fed whatever keeps us divided, distracted, and blind." She leaned in not with fire, but with a calm that cut deeper than rage. "The question isn't whether I was innocent," she said. "The question is, how many stories on these networks, in your feeds, on your screens have you believed, without ever asking who wrote them and who paid for them?" Her closing words landed without drama, only clarity. "So no, I'm not just here to defend myself. I'm here to ask this. What else have we believed without proof?" And in that moment, the paper before her wasn't just a diagram. It was a mirror angled not only at Joy, but at the entire machine. And what it showed wasn't one false report. It was something far darker, a system that had thrived on never being questioned, until now. The web had been exposed, the diagram etched into the minds of millions. But Jasmine knew even that wasn't enough. Systems don't collapse just from facts, they break when silence is shattered by a question no one dares to answer. She didn't turn toward Joy. She didn't wait for a reaction, or a nod, or permission. Instead, Jasmine turned her face slow, deliberate toward the one eye in the room that couldn't look away, the studio camera. It caught her fully now, centered, framed by the pale studio light and the heavy velvet hush that had fallen across the set. Her expression didn't flicker. There was no triumph, no anger, no exhaustion, only something harder to name: conviction, carrying the weight of sorrow. And when she spoke, it wasn't to defend or to explain. It was to press a burden directly on the conscience of the nation. "I didn't come here to defend my name," she said, her voice low but unwavering, cutting the silence like ripples across still water. "I came to ask a question." She didn't lift a hand. She didn't point to the evidence laid across the table. She didn't have to. That part was done. This wasn't about signatures, maps, or metadata anymore. This was about something deeper, something far more dangerous. The point where people stopped caring to ask what's true. Her eyes stayed locked on the lens. "I ask it of you, Joy," she said. "But more than that, I ask it of everyone watching." She paused. No camera cut away. No light shifted. The world seemed to hold its breath. "When the truth," she continued, each word falling heavy as stone, "stops turning a profit, who will still have the courage to hold it?" The words didn't echo, they sank. They didn't spark cheers or outrage. They peeled away illusions. It wasn't a question meant to be answered on air, because the answer was already known. Most people wouldn't. It was too close, too sharp, too honest. Around her, the view no longer felt like a studio. There was no chatter, no rustle of paper, no shifting of feet. Joy Behar didn't look up, didn't speak. Her face, once quick with wit and command, sat frozen, as if staring at a reflection she didn't recognize and wasn't ready to accept. The audience, moments ago alive with claps and murmurs, now sat like stone. Some had hands clasped under their chins. Others seemed caught mid-breath. A few blinked, realizing this wasn't just television. It wasn't a segment they could scroll past. It was a truth they couldn't mute. The camera stayed on Jasmine longer than live TV ever lingers. It captured not defiance, but something rarer. A calm forged in fire. A quiet steadiness that cut through every screen, every narrative, every defense. Still, no one spoke. Joy's cue cards lay untouched in front of her. Her shoulders curved slightly inward, not from embarrassment, but from weight. The kind that comes when you realize the machine you've run has carried consequences bigger than you ever admitted. She didn't apologize, she didn't argue, but she didn't look up either. And for once, there was no rescue. No producer whispering in her ear. No break to cut away. No quick pivot to another segment. Just silence heavy, undeniable. The kind of silence that follows a question you can't answer until you face yourself. And in that frozen quiet, Jasmine Crockett stayed perfectly still. She didn't blink. She didn't move. Because the question had been asked, and this time, no one could claim they hadn't heard it. Jasmine's final question hadn't landed like a quick soundbite. It fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples outward, warping every reflection it touched. By sunrise the next morning, those ripples had grown into waves. In newsrooms across the country, the air was heavy with the kind of silence that comes just before a storm breaks. But it wasn't fear, it was recalibration. Editors stared at headlines they had pre-written the night before. Now outdated, irrelevant. The script had flipped, not by shouting, not by outrage, but by something far sharper, calm, relentless truth. By 7 a.m., both conservative outlets and liberal-leaning publications had rolled out banners that sounded eerily similar rare in a time when every word was usually a weapon. They didn't scream scandal, they marked a shift. Crockett turns the table with composure and cold, hard data. And it wasn't just coverage, it was respect. Cable hosts who only yesterday had spoken of Jasmine with doubt now said her name with an edge of caution, even admiration. Agree with her politics or not, one anchor admitted Lave, you don't walk into a setup like that and walk out steering the conversation unless you came armed with more than ego. Viewers, especially older ones who had lived through decades of political theater, responded in a way no one predicted. They weren't moved by her defense. They were moved by her discipline. Across comment threads and local forums, a single phrase appeared again and again, as if everyone had arrived at the same realization at once. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She didn't posture. She laid out the evidence and let it speak. In a political age addicted to noise, Jasmine's restraint had done the unthinkable. It had quieted the room. And for an audience long weary of spin, that silence wasn't just impressive, it felt honorable. A retired Vietnam veteran wrote on his community blog, "For once, someone stepped into the fire and didn't make it about themselves. She didn't defend a brand, she defended the truth. That's leadership." But the sharpest response came from a tweet, just 12 words, no hashtags, no emojis. Posted by a former FBI field supervisor known for blunt honesty, it spread across the internet before noon. Crockett just did what a dozen congressional hearings never could. She made the media look in the mirror. It wasn't exaggeration, it was admission. And it struck harder because it didn't come from her allies, but from those trained not to be swayed. Those who knew what it meant to balance truth against politics without falling into spectacle. Behind closed doors, the producers of The View gathered in a room with the blinds shut, their voices low. Not angry, just uneasy. There was no playbook now, no quick fix. Because this wasn't backlash, this was consequence. The segment was being replayed not because it was scandalous, but because it had shifted the conversation itself. Viewers weren't just talking about Jasmine anymore. They were talking about the machine the way perception is manufactured, the cracks in narrative building, the blind spots they suddenly realized they had been complicit in. Journalists inside legacy outlets began quietly rechecking their vetting systems. Op-ed writers who had once dismissed Jasmine started adding notes to their pieces, not full retractions, but acknowledgments. One wrote, "I mistook silence for guilt." What I saw yesterday was someone who understood that facts last longer than outrage. Professors at journalism schools began weaving clips of the segment into their courses. At Northwestern University, one called it a landmark in political communication, not for the spectacle, but for its structure. Students debated the event not as entertainment, but as a turning point in accountability. Even on Capitol Hill, aides hardened by years of watching reputations implode in real time were sharing Slack links to the full uncut broadcasts. One message circulated quickly. Study this. This is how you step into a lion's den with no armor and leave owning the floor. And Jasmine? She stayed quiet. No pressers, no tweets, no interviews. She didn't need to add more. She had already said everything with documents, with recordings, and with one question that still thundered across news tickers, podcasts, and family dinner tables. When truth stops being profitable, who will still have the courage to hold it? It wasn't just rhetorical, it was radioactive. As the day unfolded, the story grew bigger than Jasmine Crockett. It now reached every anchor who read a script without verifying, every editor who chased clicks over facts, every viewer who stopped asking, "Who's behind this?" and simply hit share. Jasmine hadn't shattered the system with rage, she'd cracked it by holding up a mirror and forcing it to stare back. And somehow, in a culture hooked on short attention spans and spectacle, she had done the impossible. She made the truth go viral. The headlines, the standing ovations, the endless commentary would fade with time. But something lingered, an unspoken demand that anyone who saw Jasmine stand would be forced to examine not just the media, but themselves. That demand was the deeper lesson. Her ordeal reminded the nation that truth isn't a relic locked in dusty archives. It's alive, and it demands guardians. And those guardians are rarely who we expect. Not the polished anchor chasing ratings, not the lobbyist pulling strings in Congress, but the one who sits in the direct blast of falsehood and refuses to move without evidence. Truth demands something brutal, patience in the face of a lie designed to mimic, to seduce, to shout louder than reality. Under searing studio lights, Jasmine showed that discipline, holding steady while her reputation dangled in the jaws of speculation. The lesson was harsh but clear. Courage isn't the roar of a lion. It's the choice not to blink when the machine is rigged against you. In a culture built on viral sound bites, her silences hit harder than any slogan. That silence wasn't emptiness. It was control. The breathing room where truth could cut through. The injustice she faced being condemned on live TV without a shred of proof became the very stage where she proved that facts, calmly delivered, can pierce the loudest narrative. The human takeaway: if integrity is to survive this era of performance, it will depend on those willing to endure the unbearable stillness of checking before shouting. The second lesson was sharper. Complicity. A word rarely seen in headlines because it doesn't just indict villains, it indicts everyone. Joy Behar's unraveling showed how complicity doesn't come with snarls. It comes with smiles, excuses, and soft industry jargon about content flow and segment timing. Jasmine exposed a truth most people never wanted to face. Misinformation spreads not only because of the schemers, but because of the hands that pass it along unquestioned. Every retweet of a headline never read. Every editor who waves through a suspicious report because traffic matters more than fact. That's what keeps the gears grinding. Jasmine's words, "You weren't reporting, you were distributing," hit like a verdict. The sting was real because it pointed not just at networks, but at all of us. The lesson forces us to ask, when was the last time we pushed outrage forward without asking if it was true? It strips away the comfort of thinking only villains lie. Sometimes good people simply fail to ask one more question. Jasmine's ordeal, then, becomes a warning. A society that refuses to pause for proof will, sooner or later, trample the innocent under its own stampede of unchecked certainty. And if we don't learn from that, we are not bystanders, we are accomplices. Third comes the lesson of narrative economy, how lies move faster than truth because they carry no weight of proof. Datamine's fake report needed no context, no citations, no details. It needed only the right subject line, the right host, and perfect timing. Jasmine, on the other hand, came armed with 54 pages of documentation, a chain of custody audio file, and a financial map as dense as a spy thriller, every page a sandbag against a rising flood. The imbalance exposes a harsh fact. Lies run on speed, but truth survives on endurance. Most people reach for speed. It's easier, cheaper, instantly gratifying. Jasmine's long, deliberate rebuttal, sourced carefully and delivered without panic, reminded the country of a forgotten discipline. Truth is slow, but unstoppable if given space. Her patience under pressure revived an old principle: verify first, speak second, a rhythm so alien to modern politics that it became riveting television. The injustice she carried, that she had to prove a negative under hostile lights, showed that the shortest path from falsehood to belief is emotional impulse. Breaking that path requires dragging a mountain of receipts into the spotlight and daring the world to look away. Her steady hand placing each sheet down wasn't theater, it was instruction. The fourth lesson cuts deeper: money's endless hunger for influence and the moral decay it leaves behind. Jasmine's chart proved data mine smear wasn't an accident. It was the tip of a financial iceberg stretching from hedge funds to primetime TV. Her words, "This wasn't about me, I was the test case," revealed the chilling truth. Profit doesn't just bend facts, it manufactures them. The human meaning lies here: if information can be bought, truth will always be undercut unless ordinary people demand accountability. Jasmine's exposure of the Horizon Citadel ABC chain shattered the myth that media bias is only ideological. Often it's financial, systemic, disguised as business as usual. The injustice she faced demands a collective duty. Transparency is not optional. It is the barrier keeping commerce from buying out conscience. When truth competes with profit, the public must act as shareholders of reality itself. The fifth lesson is the most personal: agency. The trap set for Jasmine assumed she'd collapse like every other headline victim, with panic, with spin, with denial. Instead, she chose radical vulnerability, placing her faith not in outrage, but in verifiable data. That choice is terrifying because it removes every escape hatch. It says, let the facts stand and let me face whatever comes. Millions watched someone refuse to bow to fear, and in doing so, she reminded them of an unsettling freedom. They too can choose integrity over convenience. The injustice used against her became proof of something deeply human. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to replace fear with compromise. And that truth is brutal because it leaves no hiding place. If Jasmine could sit under live fire and still demand nuance, what excuse do we have when we run from smaller truths in our own lives? The sixth lesson lies in restraint. In a world built for noise, Jasmine wielded silence like a weapon, letting each fact ring louder because she refused to drown it in fury. Noise is easy, quiet is mastery. Her refusal to shout robbed joy of the chaos needed for spectacle and forced both host and viewers to sit with reality, bare and unvarnished. She showed that the strongest stance is often the refusal to fill the air with anything but proof. The imbalance she faced, being accused before 8 million people without warning, could have justified anger. Instead, her calm flipped the script. The quieter she became, the more desperate the lie looked. Audiences learned a paradox that day. Composure, not volume, is the true foundation of credible resistance. And in a culture addicted to louder and louder voices, that realization lit up every screen like a warning. Seventh is the lesson of institutional self-reflection. Within a single day, producers, journalists, and commentators were forced to examine their own practices, many for the first time in years. That viral tweet from the former FBI agent summed it up. She forced the media to look in the mirror, and that reflection wasn't meant as attack, but as a necessary act of repair, because no society can move forward if its storytellers refuse to check themselves. Jasmine's stand reminded every newsroom that credibility isn't permanent, it's rented, and the rent comes due every time a story goes live. The injustice she revealed serves as a constant invoice. When trust breaks down, the cost is paid in civic withdrawal and cracks in democracy itself. The epic weight of it is this: the invoice doesn't land on one desk. It lands on all of them: reporter, reader, lawmaker. Vigilance is everyone's bill. Eighth is the lesson of consumption. The older viewers who praised Jasmine did so not just because of her calm, but because they recognized a fading value: respect for proof. Their words, "she didn't scream, she just laid out the evidence," were less about tone than about grief for a culture that swapped discernment for spectacle. Her slow, deliberate act of placing papers on a desk became ritual, almost sacred, reminding people that citizenship is mental discipline, not tribal reflex. The injustice she endured, having to win back her own presumption of innocence, warns us of a harsher truth. The next target of a viral smear might not come as prepared. If audiences stay passive, the machine keeps running, grinding lives into clickbait. The lesson is blunt. Passive viewership equals permission. Ninth is hope, though bound to responsibility. Jasmine proved one person, armed with evidence and restraint, can flip a national story at least for a moment. That is inspiring, but also heavy, because it shows how fragile truth becomes if it depends on lone acts of courage. Her fight isn't over, systems don't crumble overnight, but she carved a path. It calls on everyone, reader, watcher, bystander, to take up part of the load she carried alone beneath blinding lights. The closing message is as sharp as cinema, but grounded in reality. The battle for truth isn't one showdown, it's a relay. Each of us gets the baton for a short stretch. Jasmine's question, "Who will hold the truth when it no longer pays?" rings both as warning and invitation. Whoever answers it next might change everything or lose everything in the attempt. That more than anything is the rawest and most urgent human lesson. Jasmine's story didn't close with applause or headlines. It opened with a challenge, because what she exposed wasn't just a media failure, it was a mirror. And now that mirror faces us. This isn't only about Jasmine Crockett. It's about every time a lie wins because truth arrived late and alone. It's about every inbox that clicks share before asking, "Is this real?" It's about every network that runs a segment for ratings, and every viewer who accepts it without one hard question. Jasmine didn't just save herself, she showed the cost of apathy. She proved silence isn't neutral, it's consent. So if you're reading this, watching this, remembering this, understand, your next click, your next comment, your next reflex to trust or doubt, it matters. The call isn't to react faster, but to think deeper. Because next time, the accused may not have a binder or a recording to fight back. Next time, the lie might win. We don't need a million Jasmines. We need one person in every room willing to ask, "Where did this come from?" One producer to say, "We don't run it unless it's verified." One teacher to say, "Check the source." One citizen to say, "I won't forward this unless I know it's true." This was a political scandal, but the answer isn't political. It's cultural. It's personal. You don't need a platform to defend truth. You need a backbone, a principle, and the courage to be disliked for asking the questions that should have been asked in the first place. Jasmine took the blow so the rest of us wouldn't have to. Don't waste it. So here it is, clear and urgent. Demand transparency from your press, your leaders, and even your friends. Speak slower, but with sharper clarity. Go beyond the headline. Ask questions before you share. And if you ever find yourself where Jasmine sat under the lights, accused without warning, remember this: calm is not surrender, proof is not theater, and truth, when delivered plainly, can tear apart any script designed to erase you. You don't need perfection to fight back. You only need preparation. And if you're not prepared yet, begin now. Because the next story they try to spin without evidence could have your name on it. Preparation isn't just about binders or recordings, it's a mindset. It's the daily habit of refusing to let headlines think for us. It's the quiet reflex to ask, "What do I know? How do I know it? Who gains if I believe this without asking?" These aren't abstract questions. They're survival skills in a world where lies travel at light speed and truth limps behind, carrying the heavy luggage of proof. Jasmine's ordeal was proof of that imbalance. A fake PDF spread across the networks in hours, while it took her 54 pages, a forensic map, and a recording to drag the truth back into daylight. If her calm seemed unshakable, It wasn't superhuman, it was discipline. Discipline we've forgotten. We live in a culture designed to reward speed. Notifications, breaking banners, feeds built for outrage. Everything is engineered for reaction, not reflection. Restraint feels unnatural. But Jasmine proved restraint is not weakness, it is leverage. By refusing to match chaos with chaos, she forced a room of 8 million to sit in silence long enough for facts to land. That's not theater, that's mastery. And it's a discipline not just for leaders, it belongs to all of us. Every withheld click, every paused repost, every second of delay before judgment is resistance. Restraint, practiced privately, scales into public integrity. Yet restraint alone isn't enough. Jasmine showed that proof must be ready before the lie arrives. She wasn't caught off guard. She came armed with receipts. Because the system that targeted her wasn't sloppy, it was precise, engineered to succeed before facts could catch up. That means we cannot wait for the next Jasmine to appear. Preparation has to become collective. Classrooms teaching media literacy, workplaces refusing to chase unverified leaks, families asking, "Where did this come from?" before passing stories at the table. Imagine the ripple if every viral post slowed at the first person who stopped to verify. Imagine if every newsroom treated clicks as secondary to truth. That is how culture changes one pause at a time. But culture change has a cost. Truth is heavy. It demands patience, stamina, and the courage to be unpopular. The alternative, though, is heavier still. A society where lies set the agenda and no one slows them down. Jasmine's moment under the lights was political theater. Yes, but its lessons reach beyond politics. They reach into every inbox, every group chat, every conversation where half-truths travel unchecked. And the lesson is brutal. If we don't stop the lie early, the truth may never catch it. Here lies the hardest truth of all. Jasmine won't always be there. The next target may not have documents, experts, or the composure to endure live fire. And when that day comes, it won't be about whether the accused can fight it, will be about whether we've learned to fight for truth without waiting for a hero. Heroes inspire, but they cannot carry a nation's conscience alone. Jasmine's stand was extraordinary only because it's rare. The real challenge is to make it common to expect it, demand it, practice it until courage is no longer exceptional, but ordinary. That responsibility rests with us, not only journalists or lawmakers, but everyone who touches the chain of information. Every time we share without reading, repeat without questioning, or accept without proof, we feed the machine that tried to crush her. Jasmine exposed the cost of complicity, but she also revealed the power of resistance. One binder, one recording, one steady voice that dismantled a lie in front of millions. Most days, our acts of resistance won't be public. They'll be quiet, invisible, choosing not to share, choosing to ask, choosing to wait. But multiplied, those small refusals can slow falsehood long enough for truth to breathe. That is the legacy of Jasmine's ordeal. Not applause, not headlines, but a demand that each of us take a fragment of her discipline into our own lives. That we practice the patience of proof before outrage. That we normalize silence until facts arrive. That we refuse to trade integrity for speed. Jasmine's courage felt extraordinary, but it shouldn't stay rare. If truth is to survive, it must be carried by the many, not the few. Because truth is fragile. It does not travel light. It cannot sprint without us carrying it forward. And if we fail, the next lie may win before the truth even leaves the gate. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.